Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Vendetti. I'm a member of the Resources and Professional Development Committee, and I'm chair of the Board of Directors of PSI Connecticut. I'll be moderating today's Perinatal Lunch and Learn. It has been a hell of a week. It's been a week of sadness because, Lindsay Clancy has reminded us in such a profoundly tragic way that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders can be serious and persistent mental illnesses. And we can't let our guard down. We can't wane from our mission, our passion, our commitment to the well-being of all families in Connecticut. So I do invite you to find some solace in an upcoming support meeting. And I will put the Google Doc link in the chat so you can see when the upcoming meetings are. I know I can speak for all of you when I say our hearts go out to the Clancy family at this time of extraordinary sorrow. There's no question that there's judgment. There's no question that people don't understand these illnesses. So in this community, we don't judge. We will maintain our compassion and our empathy, and we will educate people about what postpartum psychosis is. Okay. I know it's tough. I want to thank Janet so very, very much for joining us in this space to introduce us to her new publication. Through Invisible Mothers, I've had the opportunity to reflect on the many ways that mothers are oppressed, abused, are suffering. Patricia, you mentioned violence, and are not able to have the motherhood, or as Dr. Garcia Hallett says, the mother work that is hoped for and dreamed about. I'm honored to introduce you to Janet Garcia Hallett, who has published her qualitative research of post-incarcerated mothers. Dr. Garcia Hallett is a professor in the Department of Criminal Justice at the University of New Haven. She's incredibly gracious in accepting our invitation to speak with us this afternoon. And I do have some questions planned, but we certainly want to give you an opportunity to answer questions as well. Before I turn it over to Janet, you conducted 37 qualitative research interviews with mothers post-incarceration. And I know you're going to share an overview of your research. We'd love to hear the motivations for your work, and certainly the major themes that you identified in your interviews. I'd like to open with this piece from your book. Public assumptions about mothers in the criminal legal system render them as uncaring and expendable. Contrary to such assumptions, research finds that motherhood is a great source of motivation for women during and after incarceration. Maternal concerns and responsibilities, however, introduce an array of obstacles for formerly incarcerated mothers that the public is simply unaware of or chooses to ignore. Janet, welcome.
Thank you, Jen. And for everyone who joined us today, good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Janet Garcia Hallett. My pronouns are she, her, hers. First, I would like to thank PSI for inviting me to your Lunch and Learn gathering today. And second, I want to thank you all for actually joining me in this talk today. I know there are probably several virtual meetings going on at this very moment. So I appreciate you all taking the time to tune in today or this afternoon. So I see a few people are joining us. I'll give it a moment. So in a nutshell, a little bit about myself in no particular order. I am a criminologist, a feminist, a military wife, an Afro-Latina mother of 3 small children under 7, and an author who's published on the social injustices that mothers of color face in our correctional system. So I'll often get asked the question, what brought you to do research on mothers who've been incarcerated, specifically mothers of color? And I've always been interested and bothered by the takeover of carceral systems in Black communities like mine, because it was so front and center for me. I grew up in Harlem during the war on drugs, and I saw the impact of carceral systems firsthand. So I would attend coalition meetings and be surrounded by mothers of color who'd been incarcerated. And yet the focus from researchers and even advocates at the time was centered around the impact of mass incarceration on men. So I saw a disconnect between the media and common discussions, and for what I saw, what I was seeing around me, which was that mothers of color are also harmed by our prison system. So today, this topic remains important for me on a personal level as a mother of color myself. Again, I have 3 small children, a 6.5-year-old, 3.5-year-old, and 1.5-year-old. But as someone who was raised in a Black community that was hard hit by state violence, that pushed my community into the prison system to begin with. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell and how I got into this work. And before you all joined me in January speaking about PSI and the mission to support perinatal mothers. So I want to start off with some interaction in our virtual space together. And then I'm going to ask a question, and if you are able to type your response into the Zoom chat box. So if that sounds okay, can I get a thumbs up to put your answer in the Zoom chat box? All right, sounds good.
Yes.
All right, so first I'll ask, what does it mean to be a mother? So when you hear the word mother, what word comes to mind, or what descriptions come to mind when you think about the term or the word mothers? So let me pull up the chat box over here. I see sacrifice, to protect, caretaker, nurturer, special relationship, caring, responsible, love again, hard worker, caring, love, strength, motivation, safeguard. I see loving again, unconditional love. Okay, so a bit more specific. Some additional words that individuals have mentioned to me have been doers, go-getters, jugglers. So a juggler is doing multiple things at once. I see someone just added worry. When someone thinks about mothers, thinking about worry, concern, multitaskers. So first, thank you all for participating. Now, let's add the word invisible to the mix. So invisible mothers. When you hear this phrase or this term, what thought then comes to mind? Or what feelings come to mind when thinking about what invisible mothers could potentially—
Alrighty, we love you.
What's it? Nothing new
in
with
your
the water.
understanding?
No,
That sucks.
yeah,
Hold on.
I don't really know what's going on.
Welcome, Carrie. We're just chatting about invisible mothers. So what comes to mind when you see the term invisible mothers? What thought comes to mind? What feelings come to mind? I see pain, sadness, feeling unseen, being dismissed, very sad, lost, invisible labor, unseen again, not noticed. Low self-worth, historically, purposefully neglected. That's powerful. And disrespected. Some other terms that I've been told, or individuals have shared with me, have been feeling alone, overworked, struggling, forgotten. I saw there was unseen there, but also forgotten. So these are very much common descriptions that have come up in my work with mothers in the criminal justice system, or criminal legal system, like I like to say. Motherhood in and of itself is not always a walk in the park. In reality, it sometimes never really is. And dealing with maternal responsibilities in general can be difficult for any mother, which is why there is a market for books catered to helping women navigate things like pregnancy, helping women navigate working full-time outside the home, helping women navigate how to manage single motherhood, or even balancing motherhood with intimate relationships. And that's just to name a few. And yet this country continues to function based on misogynistic practices that expect so much from women in terms of being caregivers, while also oppressing women, in which women are literally valued as less than men in social position and even in terms of financial worth. So then we take into consideration race and ethnicity. Mothers of color have historically been ignored and disregarded through multiple marginalities. So not only marginalized for our gender, but also because of our race and ethnicity. It's the overlap of multiple marginalities that complicate the lived experiences for mothers of color. So overall, my work explores how social institutions treat mothers of color as invisible mothers during their times of need. And this restricts them from equal opportunities to do mothering. And then we see the negative outcomes of this invisibility resulting in racial differences. So we see this in pregnancy-related deaths, especially in the Black infant mortality rate, which has recently gotten a lot of political attention. And this is tied to a whole host of things, like insufficient health insurance coverage, one can have an impact on ability to afford prescriptions that you may need, economic instability that may affect your ability to actually make it to doctor's appointments when transportation is a barrier. The community environment, especially if mothers live in food deserts, where it's hard to find healthy food options. And let's not forget about discrimination by healthcare providers, especially when they dismiss the concerns of women of color. And I myself have been in that very predicament. So what does this all mean for those in the prison system, especially given our country's state of mass incarceration? So I argue that once mothers are criminalized in the criminal legal system, then the public starts to see them, but not see them as mothers navigating complicated circumstances, but to critique them for supposedly going against mainstream norms of how mothers are supposed to behave. So even though researchers, politicians, and some advocates focus on incarcerated fathers because men outnumber women in correctional facilities, this doesn't eliminate the fact that there are about 225,000 women and girls in our juvenile centers, in our jails, and in our prisons. And of that number, 60% of them are mothers. In addition to that, 58,000 pregnant individuals are entering our jails and prisons each year. So with that being said, it's one thing to show these numbers, and it's another thing to share someone's story or someone's narrative. So I want to share a story of a mother who I refer to as Madison, both here as I join you all today, but also within my book. So Madison, the name Madison is a pseudonym. It's essentially a fake name for privacy purposes. So I first met Madison back in 2014 when she shared her story with me. She was a mother who went to jail. And at the time that she went to jail, she was also 2 months pregnant. And she described the freezing cold temperatures inside the facility during the cold months. She also described the bug-infested areas that the women were required to remain in. She also described not having enough food. Forget about the quality of the food. She described not having enough food to eat during her pregnancy, and not enough healthy food options to eat during the entire pregnancy. In fact, the pregnancy snack that she was given by the DOC at the time was a bologna sandwich, which you all in the space likely know is one of the many things that is suggested not to eat during pregnancy. So on another note, when she was transferred from the local jail to the state facility, she too endured the complete disregard for human dignity. She was asked to bend over, spread her cheeks, and cough. Absolutely degrading, and yet this continues under the guise of so-called safety and security. Like many women during their pregnancies, Madison had a UTI. And after being given antibiotics and taking them as told, she went back for a follow-up at the nearby hospital and was told that it was cleared, was told that it had went away. Yet she knew that what she was being told wasn't the reality. She knew her body, she knew something was wrong, even though she was told otherwise. So still, her UTI wasn't appropriately treated during her incarceration, and she had a UTI throughout her entire pregnancy and even during delivery, which later introduced some issues for both Madison and her daughter. So before I transition into Madison's delivery experience, I want to point out shackling practices, because this is a huge problem and barrier that contributes to the mental instability that mothers face in our criminal legal system. So this is a picture of what full shackling of pregnant women looks like. So this entails the wrist handcuffs connected to a chain that is then wrapped around the waist, the pregnant belly essentially, with a black box in front that essentially connects those handcuffs to that chain. And then you can see the ankle shackles at the feet, which restricts movement. So not only does this restrict your hand movement to your waist, but it also severely hinders your ability to actually walk carefully and comfortably when already experiencing physical discomfort just from being pregnant. So there's plenty of research and plenty of reports that demonstrate this is dangerous and harmful. It drastically increases the risk of falling while pregnant. It's completely unnecessary given their state of pregnancy, and is actually opposed by the country's leading experts, and yet it still continues in our country. So when you look at who's actually being shackled, without a doubt, the use and abuse of shackling pregnant women resembles a very historical shackling of slaves, given the racialized demographic of who is pushed and pulled into our prison system. So there is currently a federal prohibition on shackling during pregnancy, labor, and recovery, but about 75 to 85% of incarcerated women are not protected by this federal prohibition. So some of you may be wondering, well, why, if there's a federal law against this, why is it still happening? Most incarcerated women are not in federal facilities where the federal prohibition applies. Most incarcerated women are in state and local facilities. And about 16 of our states have not implemented bans on shackling. So there's still a lot of work to be done. The shackling of pregnant women is the epitome of cruel and unusual punishment. It's completely unnecessary. It's harmful and dehumanizing. So when it was time for Madison to deliver her baby, she was transported to the nearby hospital in these shackles. She wasn't allowed to have family there for emotional support or physical support. But at the same time, she was forced to have 2 correctional officers in the delivery room where she was delivering her child. So she lay there in pain and discomfort, watched by correctional officers, and even the doctor questioned the officers' role, highlighting that their presence was completely unnecessary, and still it didn't matter. They were forced to be there. Madison was invisible as a woman, invisible as a mother for what was in her best interest. And yet simultaneously, she was hypervisible for her criminalized status and forced to endure excessive control and dehumanization. So I want to highlight that my work has been in New York, and New York State is somewhat unique in that it does have prison nurseries where incarcerated mothers can spend the first year or so, a little bit more, with their newborns as a form of attachment and maternal bond. And Madison had her daughter with her at first. So prison nurseries are highly regarded for the benefits that they can have for both the mother and the newborn. Unfortunately, Madison believed her daughter was treated differently at the nearby hospital and not given the proper medical care and attention because of Madison's circumstances. So you all in this virtual space may understand that it can be a number of reasons why a baby may be crying, from colic to acid reflux, overstimulation, sickness, infection. It could be anything, literally anything under the sun. In Madison's case, her daughter had an infection, but the staff at the nearby hospital were adamant. They're completely adamant that the baby must have been withdrawing from drugs, or that she must have been pinching the baby. They were completely adamant, disregarded her concerns. So Madison shared with me, they thought she was withdrawing of drugs. When I said to them, no, I wasn't on drugs. And if I was on drugs, every visit y'all took me to the doctor, y'all would have noticed because you drug test me. So Madison wanted that maternal bond with her daughter, but she believed the hypervisibility of her criminalized status prevented her daughter from getting the proper attention that she deserved. So she also shared with me, I felt like she was being treated unfairly because her mom was in prison. Like she didn't get the treatment a regular person, a regular civilian would have received. And I didn't appreciate that. Once the baby went with Madison's mother, about a month and a half after being in the prison nursery and going to the nearby hospital to the prison, she was able to finally get the proper medication that she needed for her infection. And mind you, this is an infection she had around the brain because she delivered with the UTI that wasn't properly treated during her incarceration. Also, when the baby was finally outside of that environment and with her mother, she was finally able to get alternative formula because the baby had a milk allergy as well. So both of these matters weren't appropriately addressed given where Madison was. And Madison is just one of the 37 mothers who I interviewed in New York. So Madison was incarcerated at Bedford Hills in New York State, which is recognized for its prison nursery. But very few facilities across the country actually have prison nurseries. And because of that, most incarcerated mothers are separated from their newborns after birth, where the newborns are given to family or placed in foster care, often never to be seen during the remainder of their incarceration unless the caretaker is both willing and able to bring them. So this brings me to the concept of mothering from a distance. So there are plenty of self-help books about mothering from a distance, like parents being divorced or when the mother is away on military deployment, when the mother lives in a different country from their children, which is called transnational mothering. And much like these mothers in the system, they also experience the mental and emotional distress from being separated from their children. But despite what some may think, being released from jail, being released from prison doesn't always resolve this. Since housing barriers, employment obstacles, the child welfare system, and other systems of control typically exist all at the same time, making it hard for mothers to actually reunite with their kids after incarceration. So given the wide range of obstacles that mothers face during incarceration and after incarceration, the process of navigating motherhood can be very stressful, very overwhelming. So I know I don't have a lot of time with you all today, but this slide is a very, very quick snippet into some of the things that I dive in deeper within one chapter of the book, the mothering chapter of the book. And the mothers describe losing place in their children's lives, the impact of losing time with their children during their incarceration, witnessing the negative behaviors that their children kind of learned. And this is when their children were with family members or if they were in the foster care system. So kind of picking up bad habits from those environments when they were with other individuals. And then those challenging interactions with kids who felt like they were abandoned or kids who felt like they were let down or upset at their mothers for having been incarcerated. And as a result, the mothers try to address these circumstances by trying to gain positionality in their children's lives, trying to make up for that lost time. And this is often done by someone say doing the most, like they would try to do everything just to compensate for that lost time. Reacquainting with their children with healthier routines, like waking up and saying good morning or coming inside the home and washing their hands. So things that they valued as important that they wanted to teach their children. And then providing for their children and grandchildren in whatever way possible. And they often saw this as a second chance when they came home. So in these ways, they were doing mother work. They were doing mother work that they were able to do and that they valued and they thought would be helpful in their circumstances. Unfortunately, these efforts are largely invisible to the public, to outsiders, and it goes unnoticed by those who hold a very restrictive understanding of what motherhood looks like, and are critical of these mothers simply because of their involvement in the system. So where do we go from here? So oftentimes in trying to help others, we can cause more harm if decisions are being made without their own input. So for this reason, it's important to work in partnership with those who've been directly impacted as a true experts. So I quickly want to share some things that the mothers have shared with me to highlight their voices. So mothers in the criminal legal system are expected to balance expectations of them as mothers in the midst of so many overlapping barriers from having served time away from their children. And then also trying to get their lives in order with having a criminal record. And if they didn't meet these expectations, then they were often viewed as letting others down or letting themselves down. And the mothers believe that instead of hyper surveillance of what they shouldn't do, that programs and practitioners should devote more attention to what they can do within their circumstances. So, for example, Kiana cautioned against the constant reminders about being on parole. She was constantly reminded about parole conditions and what she couldn't do and what she had to do. Meet with your parole officer. You can't have any dirty urines. You have to get a job, and constantly being reminded about needing to do certain things. And if not, then she wouldn't be able to get her child. So she was essentially constantly being told, don't F up or you'll never get your kids back. So in her words, she shared, when somebody constantly feels like they're being watched and not good enough, that's when that person goes downhill, especially in her case, because she had a history of substance use. So the repetition to stay on the straight and narrow, translated into counselors truly doubting her and left her feeling disempowered in her mothering journey. So again, believing that reminding them of what they can do within their circumstances was more beneficial, especially given her case. Rashida was another mother who believed that the most important component of her program was to learn about the woman's own dreams, their own personal desires, and then providing them with the practical suggestions based on this information. So not imposing your own ideas of what would be helpful, but listening to what their own goals and desires are within their mothering journey, and then providing those practical suggestions that are realistic for them given those circumstances. And the problem is that programs often have a limited capacity to provide such personalized attention and assistance. And the default approach then becomes one that is detached from the mother's realities, and this is ultimately less helpful for them. So it's important to take a strength-based approach that reinforces their strengths, recognizes their mother work, and that validates them in their desires and then in their journey. So another area where there's a lot of work to be done concerns interactions with healthcare professionals, especially as it relates to language, communication, and issues with providing adequate care. So for instance, during doctor's visits and pediatrician's visits, those first early months, there are screenings to assess for postpartum depression and mother's overall mental well-being. Yet, even I've personally found that the questions are often leading questions and worded in a way that often leave mothers not responding truthfully and don't encourage full comfort and full transparency. So I'll give some examples. So for example, you're not depressed, right? That's a leading question. No thoughts of killing yourself. No thoughts of harming others. These are all examples of leading questions or actually leading statements. And they encourage mothers to respond in a certain way. So instead of no thoughts of killing yourself, right? A better way to access is, since your baby was born, have you ever felt like you didn't want to be alive anymore? Which can then be followed up with extra questions that tap into, have you ever thought about taking your own life? But to say you're not depressed, right, or no thoughts of killing yourself is a very leading question or statement that kind of forces the mom to respond a certain way, or the expectation that she will respond a certain way. It doesn't allow for space to be honest and truthful in those feelings at the moment. And as another note, practitioners may also go through these questions very quickly in the interest of time, but rushing through these types of questions may suggest that you're already expecting a certain response and not taking the time or providing the space for the mom to answer honestly. So these things are not limited to primary care managers or pediatricians' offices, but it remains true for therapists, social workers, counselors, program coordinators, you name it. But these are missed opportunities to identify when a mom can use some additional support. So I really want to encourage and stress mindfulness when engaging with mothers, especially perinatal mothers, especially oppressed perinatal mothers. So lastly, I recognize that it's easier for the public, the general public, to judge individual people than it is to recognize and criticize broken systems that complicate circumstances for other groups, other oppressed groups. So as you all continue in your work to support and advocate for perinatal mothers, I'll give you a moment to take a picture of this slide, but it shows a few organizations doing amazing advocacy work for mothers in the criminal legal system. So very briefly, the Advocacy and Research on Reproductive Wellness of Incarcerated People, it was founded by Carolyn Suffren, who's done amazing work studying women's experiences with pregnancy in prison. And their team does a lot for reproductive health and reproductive justice overall. the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. It works under the mantra of nothing about us without us. So it includes them in that narrative. It's an international network of justice of all women and girls working to abolish the broken prison system. Restore Her is actually a reentry advocacy org in Georgia, and it's led by and for justice-involved women of color. And it was actually founded by a Black woman who was pregnant when she was incarcerated, but then she miscarried after falling while shackled. So again, you see that same theme and issue of shackling coming up. And she never received the proper prenatal care in her situation. The Correctional Association of New York is actually an organization I interned at when I was in college. Definitely my first kind of step into advocacy work for incarcerated women, incarcerated mothers. They've published reports, they have access inside prisons to report on instances in which shackling was still being used after New York passed law against it, being able to understand issues with correctional officers, being uninformed about what policies were, et cetera. And you all are probably familiar with ACLU in terms of the advocacy work on reproductive rights and the rights of incarcerated population overall. So earlier I did show a map of states without shackling prohibitions, and perhaps your membership may be able to team up with other sister chapters in states that don't have any prohibitions against shackling during pregnancy, labor, and recovery. But I think PSI can be very vital in supporting incarcerated mothers and formerly incarcerated mothers, especially those who are separated from their children. So I'll leave you all with that note.
Janet, thank you so much for sharing your work.
Inviting me.
This is, it's painful, but it's important. I want to give folks an opportunity. Luz or Ashley could talk a little bit about some of the work here in Connecticut. But first, I just want to read another piece from your book. Listening to and understanding formerly incarcerated women as visible mothers is more constructive in helping them and addressing systemic oppression than the carceral focus on managing, controlling, and punishing bad behaviors. I want to give folks an opportunity to, well, first of all, 3 people who've joined us today will be able to receive this amazing book, as you see highlighted here among the trees. But I want to give folks an opportunity to share work that's being done in Connecticut. I'm not sure how long. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Luz. Hi, Luz.
Awesome. Hi, Jennifer. So thank
Hi.
you for this presentation. It took me a little bit of time to log in, but I caught the gist of it. And I see also that it's being recorded. So I'll go back to make sure I listen to the whole entire presentation. So thank you, Janet. Thank you for bringing this information to light. It is critical information in serving women and children. All children deserve a great foundation, regardless of where they are in their life journey with their mom and dad or caregiver. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Just to briefly highlight a few of the things that are occurring in Connecticut, OEC, Office of Early Childhood, funds the Department of Correction projects, both for men and women. I oversee the Women Correctional Institution project, and Ashley Minahan is here, which is one of the wonderful women doulas that has the honor and the blessing to serve and support the women under supervision at the correctional institution, and she can share some of her experience. But just to give you a high level, we fund, we support doula services to go into the prisons and support the women both prenatally and during the birth and postnatally. And so they offer classes. They offer that one-to-one during that critical time as they are bringing life into the world. And also we have provided library books to support the women on education while they're preparing to bring life into the world. We've also done several educational classes on how to support the caregivers as well, maybe tapping into home visiting. That hasn't really come to a full scale as much as I would love to, but they offer home visiting services. The person who takes the baby from the hospital, whether it's the father, the grandmother, and we actually prioritize that to make sure that there is a slot for that caregiver. And one of the most important things I think has come out of this work is that the women are all incarcerated under one unit. And so they're supporting each other. We have purchased breast milk pumps, and we've seen an increase of women pumping milk. And whenever possible, that formula is taken to the caregiver home so they can be part of that process. And so I just wanted to share that this work speaks volumes, but it's very dear and close to my heart. Again, I want to close this conversation with every child, every baby deserves a good foundation and a good start. And so I'll close it there and see if Ashley Minahan wants to share a little bit more about her experience and doula services.
Luz, thank you
Sure.
for sharing. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Luz, you pretty much summed everything up. I mean, I was going to talk about lactation, and you talked a little bit about that. I think one thing that's been really cool is that since we started, we have had 100% lactation rates with the moms. Before, most of them weren't really trying it, and now every single mom that's coming through is initiating breastfeeding, and then they are pumping. They're like pumping machines. Some of them are sending 30, 35 ounces a day out to their baby. So that has been something that is completely new. We were able to provide them with breast pumps, electric breast pumps. Luz was able to buy hand pumps so that when they go out to court, they have a pump. And my agency was able to give them breast pumps for their rooms. And it's been really awesome to be able to go and support the births as well. It's really hard if somebody doesn't have support during birth, and the corrections officers that are in the room are not support. They're there to watch, but we're able to really be there and be hands-on. I got to a birth one time and touched the mom's belly, and she said, "This is the first time anybody else has felt my baby kick." So there's some really meaningful interactions that really help. I'm so thankful to be able to do this work.
Thank you for sharing, Ashley. That is so powerful. And there are a number of stories and situations that, I didn't cover in the amount of time I have with you all. But when Madison was at the hospital after she delivered her baby, she wanted to breastfeed. But she described that the officers weren't interested and willing to take her often enough to where the baby was in the hospital in order for her to breastfeed. And then it turns out that the baby had the milk allergy, so the formula was making the baby sick as well. So it's amazing to be able to provide women with that support too, especially because breastfeeding isn't always easy. So that's amazing as well.
Ariana and Ashley and Erin are asking about lactation support. Is there any volunteer opportunities and also mental health support?
Well, it is incredibly hard to sort of get in there. It takes a really long time. They have actually been closed since the beginning of COVID to opening up to other volunteers. That has recently just changed in the past couple of months. As far as lactation, I'm a CLC and I go every week, and I have they call it the pumper group. And so the clients they're all coming in and we're talking about pumping. There has definitely been, lots of struggles and issues that have come up, but so far it's all been within my scope as a CLC. We've been able to sort of figure things out. I think if there was a need for higher level of care with an IBCLC, we could probably figure out a way for that to happen, but there hasn't really been a need for that. As far as mental health support, that I think can be a real challenge. There's a social worker that they meet with, but
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot.
Yeah. Can I just add a little bit to that? I think part of this whole initiative is really engaging the leaders within the Department of Corrections, really looking at their culture. And I think that we are in a space and time that they're open to that. And so we're just trying to kind of figure this all out as we're moving along. But certainly is something that has to be at the forefront for moms that are incarcerated, right? And so I think we can inch ourselves that way, in that direction, given the fact that we're in there, we're meeting monthly, we have regional meetings. I mean, they just had a huge grant and they built a playground or a playroom for the caregivers that are bringing the children. So I see some improvement, but I think it goes back to really engaging the leaders, really penetrating that type of culture within the workforce. And which brings me to the point of the strength-based approaches that Janet mentioned. And so I know we're far from that, but I think that's where the core is. Although I don't have a straight answer for you regarding mental health, we do certainly know it's important and it's needed. And certainly in our conversations on a monthly basis, at regional basis, we can certainly continue to ensure that we can do the best that we can here in Connecticut. We also are bringing Doug Edwards into our regional meetings where we're just signing kind of a contract with him to talk about co-parenting with the women and helping them through that. So I just wanted to add those pieces. Again, it's not a straight shoot answer regarding the mental health, but I think that we're in a space where we're leading to changes.
That's encouraging.
Very much, yeah.
Janet, I was curious about what came up for you during your research. This was a labor of love. It was important to you. You were driven to do it. You needed to tell these stories. How did you cope with any feelings? You're seeing all of this systemic oppression and, affecting these mothers' lives. And that there were many, many other mothers that you could have interviewed. How did you cope with that process yourself?
That's a really good question. And this often comes up with, criminologists or anyone who works with others who have experiences with trauma, and how to control your own emotions, right? And engaging or supporting others. So at the time when I interviewed the mothers, I wasn't a mother myself yet. And in the process of working on this project, I became a mother to those 3 little kids. And it was even more of an aha moment to actually go through the mothering experience myself. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a military wife. So being in a new place without a support system, and being a new mom and all the things in terms of mothering. So it was very much an eye-opener, and really being able to fully understand them more, even more once I became a mother myself. in terms of some of the hardships that they were describing to me and when I spoke with them, and that they shared with me before I was a mother myself. So there were times when crying and when speaking with me and trying to control my own tears and whatnot, and them being completely vulnerable with me at times. Again, it was very familiar stories compared to individuals from my own community. So me growing up, I was familiar with the children who saw their parents get incarcerated. But in speaking with the moms, hearing it from their own perspective. So, and that was the whole point of the project. I wanted to focus on their own narratives because whether it was to focus on fathers or whether it was to focus on children, like the innocent children narrative, but less often was there any interest in hearing about mothers because the conversation was just so punitive and so kind of dismissive or degrading because this image of what mothers are supposed to and not supposed to do. So I came in completely open to what they would share with me, and they're respectful of their vulnerability with me. And then, but once I became a mother myself, it really hit home. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
Because it is very painful knowing, Patricia started us off with talking about violence, the violence in our society, the trauma, and, most of the moms, the invisible moms, they have entered the world. As Luce was saying, they were children and they deserve to have everything that we all want for our children. And they didn't have it. They didn't have it because forces were against them from the start. It's very painful.
So I
You
do
remind
thank you
us.
all for here because I know this is a difficult conversation. So, and sometimes just listening to a conversation with others can also be triggering. So I appreciate you all who are still around and who have tuned in because I know it can be a difficult topic. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you for joining and sticking to listen to the conversation.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to close with your reminder, Dr. Garcia Hallett, that we have a responsibility to promote social equity for the marginalized women and mothers in our patriarchal and racist society who are pushed into carceral systems. That is so true. Anyone for a final remark? Thank you, Julia. Julia said it was a wonderful presentation, Janet.
Thank you, Julia.
This was such an important event. And I know that we will all have a lot to think about. And thank you for bringing visibility to mothers who are invisible to many of us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your work. We're going to continue to follow you. Hopefully you'll be with us in Connecticut for a long time. Do you think you will?
I think in Connecticut to stay, hopefully. No more moving for me.
Oh, I hope so. Oh, that'd be wonderful.
And
yes.
To Luz and Ashley, if there's any way I can support in your efforts, just, shoot me an email, let me know.
I'm 10 steps ahead of you. Well, thank you for the offer, though. I'm definitely sending an email to my supervisor. So
okay, that's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
Have a
for
wonderful
joining.
Weekend. Take care, everyone. Do some
Thank
self-care.
you, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Garcia Hallett. Thank you. Thank you. Great to see you, Kathy. Love you. Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for the book suggestion. Thank you, Erin. Hi, Julia.
That was great. It's like you said, Janet, it's a very difficult. I mean, it's very difficult to listen to this presentation than to remind ourselves of the circumstances and learn more about the circumstances that these mothers go through. But at the same time, it's very activating, and we have a passion to work with women. And I don't know, I was thinking, Jen, we have to expand mind over more to the correctional system. That's what that was in my mind.
That's a great idea. So,
You know,
Yeah,
if we are-
I was thinking the same thing.
Were you?
Yeah, I was just thinking like, I mean, I work at UConn Health. I'm the social worker for OB, and every so often we have prisoners come in to deliver. It's been a while, but I have like 2 in mind, and it is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
The way things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing, I try to encourage my students and even individuals who are correctional officers or law enforcement. I always talk about language, because language is something that sometimes we don't pay too much attention to, but the person that we are speaking of can be impacted. So when speaking about people who are in the system, I try to always say like people or individuals or women or mothers, and not like inmates or ex-cons or prisoners. So we are validating their presence as a person, and not like a label as their circumstance. And I know it's very common, especially when speaking to people in the DOC and correctional officers, because it's literally in handbooks and guidebooks and policies. It's inmate, prisoner, that type of language. And then it kind of reinforces that language when those individuals who are in that space are constantly being called those terms, and they begin to internalize it. So I just in spaces and having these conversations, I just try to encourage that we use more like humanizing language, so that we're reinforcing their presence as a person and not their circumstances.
Right.
But I definitely hear you. I can imagine being in that space, that work environment, and knowing their circumstances, and imagining that it's difficult to see them in that space and try to do your best to support them. And I'm sure you also have your own restrictions in your capacity as well. And that's also difficult, right? Try to balance what we wish we can do and try to do everything to support, and know that you have your own barriers that, the system has put in place for you as well. So.
Yeah, exactly. You gave us a lot of things to think about in terms of programming and advocacy. It's really important.
Thank you so much, Janet.
Thank you for joining.
I gotta run to another meeting, but I very much appreciated your talk and your work, and the motivation that you instill in us to continue this work.
It's difficult, but it's important, and it's powerful, meaningful. Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. Take care.
I'll see you
Bye-bye.
Monday, Julia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
See you soon, Michelle.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Take care.